The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
The Ministry of Finance published a 2023 budget report for 10 months. According to the document, the Revenue Service collected 14 billion lari from taxes, which was 83% of the 2023 budget plan, so 3 billion lari should be mobilized in the remaining months, November and December, to fulfill the budget. According to the Ministry of Finance, the largest sum came from VAT, followed by income and excise taxes. As for the income from the privatization of state property, it amounted to 104 million lari, which was 58.8% of the annual plan of 200 million lari. In 10 months of 2023, the number of visitors to the protected areas of Georgia exceeded the same period last year by 19%. Protected areas of Georgia hosted over 1 million visitors. According to the Agency of Protected Areas, compared to last year, the number of foreign visitors has increased by 29%. 58% of visitors to protected areas in 2023 were citizens of other countries. The chairman of the ICC Georgia, Fadi Asli, addressed the Minister of Justice and copied the Prime Minister of Georgia regarding the orders number 938 and number 939 issued by the Minister of Justice of Georgia about the new regulations regarding transactions that are related to real estate and business legal entities. In a letter sent to the minister, the chairman of ICC Georgia explains that the new regulations contribute to procedural difficulties and additional bureaucracy for businesses, as well as increasing costs and extending the deadlines for registering foreign companies operating on the basis of legal power of attorney for each simple transaction. Fadi Asli urges Rati Bregadze to communicate with representatives of the private sector along with the cancellation of the regulation. Georgia received 152 million lari from tolls in 10 months. According to the data of the State Treasury, 433,430 transit trailers passed through the corridor of Georgia in January-October, of which 49,280 trucks paid the toll in October. They contributed 17 million lari to the budget. Both indicators hit a record high. Container cargo turnover in Poti Port has increased dramatically. According to the data of APM Terminals Poti, more than 0.5 million containers were processed in 10 months of 2023. More specifically, in January-October, Poti Seaport processed a total of 500,000 units of containers, which was 77% more compared to the figure of 2022. This year, Poti Port received 284 container ships, while 173 ships entered the port for the same period last year. As for the number of processed vehicles, the port served more than 69,000 cars. This is The Checkpoints. I'm Elena Kvanchilashvili, author and the host of the show, and the Checkpoints team is ready to sum up Business and Economics Week for you. With the support of the European Investment Bank, EIB, and the European Union, the European Business Association, EBA, in partnership with ProCredit Bank Georgia, organized the EU-Georgia Business Forum 2023 at Pullman Tbilisi Access Towers. John Breckfeld, the president of the European Business Association, Shalva Papuashvili, the chairman of the Parliament of Georgia, Paul Herchinsky, the ambassador of the European Union to Georgia, Maciej Chura, head of the EIB Global Regional Representation for the South Caucasus, and Lasha Khutsishvili, the Minister of Finance of Georgia, opened the forum and delivered welcome speeches. The forum brought together leaders from different fields of activity in a single space in order to meet and establish business relations, discuss current challenges, and summarize all the achievements in the business sector. The event featured the presentation of the EU Business Climate Report 2023, prepared by the European Business Association and supported by the European Union, which summarizes the future steps of the country's development and assesses the reforms from the perspective of both public and private sector representatives. The presentation was followed by the panel discussion on the access to finance topic, participated by the decision makers from the European business community in Georgia, government officials and international experts. The panelists reviewed the main findings of the presented report, the challenges related to access to finance for small and medium-sized enterprises, the importance of proper regulatory framework, trade-related business issues, and the European association process in Georgia. In particular, emphasis was placed on the success achieved towards European integration and the importance of the active involvement of the business sector in this direction. Participants also highlighted the role of business support.
Today we are here having the event, the EU-Georgia Business Forum 2023. This is an extension of the forum we had last year. Last year we had also the forum, and in last year's forum we presented the European Economic Cooperation Platform, which is a platform where all business associations work together in communication. And at the same time we represented last year the EU Business Climate Report, which we use for evidence-based public-private dialogue. This year we're so happy, thanks to the European Investment Bank who sponsored the event today and the European delegation who supported us with the climate report, that we have a new business climate report that we are publishing today, that we are providing to everybody to hear what are the European businesses' comments about the economy, what are their problems, are they happy, what are the improvements with last year and what are the less improvements that we have. The report is very interesting, it is very detailed, it even separates big companies and small companies because they have different priorities. And I would recommend everybody to read the report, and let's use this as a base actually for the next year. The European Business Association, which is value doing business in Georgia, will be the same as doing business in Europe. We want to use that climate report for future public-private dialogue to have result-oriented and evidence-based public-private dialogue.
We are here today on the EU-Georgia Business Forum, organized by the European delegation to Georgia, European Business Association, and supported also by the European Investment Bank. This is an important day, an important event, because it allows us to reflect in this extended and very good circumstances of cooperation about business climate in Georgia, about business opportunities related to cooperation between Georgia and the European Union. As a representative of the European Investment Bank in the region, for us it's very important to support private sector development in Georgia, in particular micro, small and medium enterprises, which we do with our commitment for lending, guarantees and technical assistance, which is now reaching over 400 million euro. Also, the important aspect of the business climate is infrastructure, and the European Investment Bank has been financing many different infrastructure projects in Georgia, including connectivity infrastructure, connecting Georgia to the EU, so important in the context of the discussions during today's conference. I can mention here the East-West Highway and the recently opened section of that highway. Last but not least, I think the conference and the event like this is a good opportunity to reflect on the future, what future brings for us. And here one needs to underline environmental sustainability and fight with climate change, and how we can develop our businesses, how we can support development of the private sector in a sustainable way, to green it, to make it more climate friendly, and thus providing for for our future.
So we have a very important meeting today. It's the EU-Georgia Business Forum, organized by European Business Association in Georgia. A very important meeting in order to make sure that the business climate in Georgia is conducive to doing business of EU companies in Georgia and Georgian companies in Europe. The European Business Association every year publishes an index of business climate in Georgia. We sincerely are looking forward to improved conditions for making business in Georgia. This is all about catching up with European Union, increasing the prosperity and creating conditions for businesses, both Georgian businesses to expand to Europe and European businesses to come over and invest in Georgia. So very important meeting, and I'm really proud that European Union has been part of it through direct financial assistance, as well through our European Investment Bank helping to organize this yearly event.
Tom Keating, the founding director of the Center for Financial Crime and Security Studies, CFCS, at RUSI, visited Georgia. At RUSI, his research focuses on matters at the intersection of finance and security. He is also currently a specialist advisor on illicit finance to the UK Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee ongoing inquiry. He has a master's in intelligence and international security from King's College London, where he studied the effectiveness of the global counter-terror finance regime. Prior to joining RUSI in 2014, he was an investment banker for 20 years at JP Morgan. His research on finance and security considers a number of themes, including the financial dimension of state threats, the methods by which adversaries seek to undermine Western democracies and exploit their financial systems via the use of active financial measures, sanctions, the effectiveness and evolution of sanctions regimes, terrorist financing, the effectiveness of current approaches to terrorist financing, the use of financial intelligence as a security tool, and the evolution of terrorist financing methods and responses, proliferation financing, the role of finance as a tool of disruption in combating state and non-state actor proliferation ambitions, organized crime, assessing the financial dimension of priority transnational threats, including the illegal wildlife trade, environmental crime, and human trafficking, and new approaches to tackling financial crime, the role of public-private partnership and information sharing. Tom Keating has contributed to a variety of publications and media outlets, has given evidence to UK parliamentary and US congressional hearings, and spoken at a range of high-level multilateral forums, including the UN Security Council and the Financial Action Task Force and a number of its regional bodies. The Checkpoint sat down with Tom Keating in Tbilisi for a short interview. Mr. Keating, thank you for your time, and thank you for taking our questions. Let us start with the purpose of your visit. Why are you in Georgia? Is it your first time in Georgia? And what has this days been for you here in Georgia?
So it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. And it's my pleasure to make my first ever visit to Georgia. So it's exciting to be here. So the specific reason we are here is I work for a research program called the Center for Financial Crime and Security Studies at RUSI, and we look at issues at the intersection of finance and security. Finance and security are linked, whether we talk about economic security or sanctions or money laundering. These two issues come together. So we're here together with the Regional Institute on Security Studies to look at how Georgia is dealing with the international sanctions that have been put on Russia in response to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
What has this international sanctions on Russia changed in terms of how we link finance and security with each other?
So the particular project that we run out of our office in Brussels is looking at how the EU is dealing with the challenge of sanctions. And it's important to remember that although sanctions have been a tool of foreign policy for the EU for many decades, it's not really until the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, that sanctions have become a genuine challenge for the EU. By that I mean, because the Russian economy and the EU economy are so closely linked, when the EU makes decisions on sanctions, they obviously do also have an effect in the EU, and the EU needs to take strong steps to make sure the sanctions are properly implemented. So it's a fascinating challenge because of this close connection between the Russian economy and the EU economy, and between the connection of the EU with then regional countries like Georgia, who aren't part of the sanctions coalition but have trade relations with both the EU and with Russia. So it's a very complex situation.
Yes, what makes Georgia complex in that situation?
Just look at the map. Look at the map where Georgia sits, obviously bordering Russia with long-standing economic relations with Russia on the one hand, but at the same time on an EU accession path. So stuck in the middle between these two big economies, and with some difficult decisions to make, with obviously political narrative coming from Russia, also with visits coming from Brussels. And so for Georgia, I think there are a lot of questions to think about in trying to navigate this narrow line, this tightrope between the West and Russia.
So what is your first impression? How is Georgia doing that? Because us, like Georgian citizens, we were quite confused at some time when, for example, the Prime Minister said that we are not aligning with EU sanctions, but at the same time they were, yes, and very careful in not breaching these sanctions.
I think it's very important to remember that sanctions are a political tool. So they're a political tool. What I mean by that is that countries decide whether or not they want to implement sanctions. Sanctions aren't a function of criminal law. Someone isn't guilty of something and therefore they have sanctions placed on them. And so for any government, they are going to make a political determination as to what is the right thing to say. Now, the interesting point is that many governments say one thing, but then something else happens. So let's take the current sanctions situation. It may be, and I don't follow Georgian politics closely, but it may be that the government says we're not going to align with Western sanctions. But in Georgia, there are banks, for example, who have very close connections in Europe, in London, in the United States. And if those banks don't follow the Western sanctions, then that's very bad for those banks. They will lose their connections to Europe, to London, to the United States. And that's very bad for the Georgian economy. So in a way, whatever the government said, the banks were going to take a decision which was to follow the sanctions because it was in their business interest to do so. So I think we often see, I give the example of Hungary. In Hungary, you have President Orban, who is very vocally negative about sanctions, yet his government still votes for sanctions at the European Union. So sanctions are they're a political game.
Mm-hmm. You have worked for years at JP Morgan's, and you know how the finance is linked with overall security. Why is it important to be aware of the sanctions, and why is it important to play the wise game?
So you're right. And finance, the link between finance and security has, I think, become even more important in the last few years, because a few years ago, everyone thought that we'd had the end of history, that there was going to be globalization, free trade, everything was going to be beautiful. But as we've discovered, in recent years, the global economy has kind of fragmented into different blocks. And countries like Georgia have found themselves in a very tough position because they're being almost made to choose. Do you want to be with the EU? Do you want to be Russia? How do you stay in the middle? So understanding the pros and cons of decision-making around issues related to economic security is very important. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that money buys influence. And we see increasingly where countries decide that they want to influence the politics of another country, yeah, money changes hands, people try and buy influence. So kind of understanding the finance implications on a country's security are really, really important. And one of the messages that we always try and share when we visit countries is you should think about finance as a matter of national security. Your economy is a matter of national security, and financial flows, the way finance can influence politics, is also a matter of national security if you're not careful.
In this process, there should be government, like the public sector that is well involved into these processes, and also private sector that is ready to withstand all these impacts and negative impacts, right? How would you assess Georgia in that direction?
So you're absolutely right, the private sector is critical, because let's remember, the money is being moved by the private sector. The trade that is sanctioned is being moved by the private sector. And so the private sector has to be a central part of the solution. I think from what we have seen in our visit here so far is that many Georgian companies and banks, they appreciate their connections with the international markets, with international finance, with international trade. And so the decisions that they make will want to protect their business. They won't want to make decisions that damage their business. So continuing to operate with Russia as a bank, for example, or continuing to operate with sanctioned companies as a bank is very bad for your business if you want people in Frankfurt or Paris or London to trade with you. The same, we see that the EU has now started to bring forward the capability to put sanctions on companies in third countries that are facilitating sanctions evasion. So if you're sitting there as a Georgian company and you're facilitating sanctions evasion, you are probably making a choice that is going to lead you not to have the opportunity to trade with the EU anymore. Now, you might make that choice. It's your sovereign right to make that choice. But if you make that choice, then you know what the consequences are, which is, in this case, you might not be able to trade with the EU in the future.
Are only facts important? Because you are also aware how big investors think and what their logic is in doing business with such countries. Are only facts important, or also, I don't know, some perceptions of the country also? Because we have a border with Russia. Russia is our biggest neighbor. So do you think that fact also raises those doubts that Georgia might be used for the evasion of sanctions?
Yeah, so there's, in the business world, in the finance world, there's a very important phrase, which is that investors make, quote, risk-based assessments. So obviously, if a country has a border with Russia, then it's going to trade with Russia. I mean, that's just a fact of life. And therefore, if you are an investor, when you're thinking about the different risks to consider, the fact that there is a border is a risk that you will want to understand. And if the company you are investing in is a trading company, a trading goods or a logistics company, or it's making electronics, then you're going to want to understand what that company's relationship is with that border, because that border represents a risk. So, inevitably the geography of Georgia is going to be a consideration for any investor. And again, it's up to the company or the leadership of any country to decide what profile do I want to show to the world. And that's a judgment that a government and the private sector in that country is going to make.
But would you say that in that vulnerable situation for the country, it is really important that what investors hear from public officials is the same what they hear from the private sector representatives? For example, the example of this is NBG's current law. If you have been following this these events when the private sector, the banks were saying that we will stand by international sanctions, and so it seemed that NBG was giving them the choice not to do that or to do that. I mean, isn't that even more confusing in this current situation?
So the other really important word in business is certainty. And I can tell you, coming from the UK, where we had the Brexit vote, and the one thing after the Brexit vote, after the UK's decision to leave the EU, the one thing that business was always asking the government is, give us certainty, right? We might not agree with leaving the European Union, but we want certainty so we can plan. And it's the same on sanctions. You've got to have certainty, because you cannot be planning your business to go one way and to comply with certain regulations, and then the next day you go the other way. I mean, for a business, uncertainty is it's a critical problem. And again, for investors, uncertainty is a bad thing. And we see that in the UK. Uncertainty means no one wants to invest in the UK as much as they used to. So certainty is what matters, and changing your mind is uncertain.
And also, if we look at the definition of financial crime, does that change over time? I mean, with this like tech becoming almost as important as, I don't know, everything in our lives.
Yes, one of the things we look at in our program is exactly that, the way that the threats evolve over time. I mean, the problem is that the old threats still exist. You know, people are still conducting financial crime with suitcases of cash, but they also have new options. They have cryptocurrencies, they have fintech, electronic payment companies. And so what we find is two things. First of all, that financial crime gets more complex and more sophisticated. So in other words, there are many more ways of moving dirty money around the world. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that the kind of list of threats that we need to worry about is also getting longer. It's not just people doing drugs trafficking, it's also people doing weapons trafficking or human trafficking, or it might be international fraud, or it might be sanctions evasion, or it might be people trying to influence elections with money. So the number of threats where finance plays a role has expanded enormously. So, I mean, the good news for us as researchers is there's lots and lots to look at. The bad news for the world is that the threats are just getting bigger.
Exactly. And to sum up our conversations, if we look at 2024, what would you identify as main challenges or as main priorities to watch out for?
Yeah, so we've just talked about this question of kind of complexity and sophistication of the types of financial crime. I think if we go back to the first part of our conversation, talking about sanctions, for the EU, 2023 was about implementation of sanctions. It was about really making sure that the sanctions were being implemented properly. In 2024, I think we can expect to see the EU be more assertive with enforcement. You know, we really haven't seen any companies or individuals being punished for facilitating sanctions evasion. That's in the EU. And I also think we can perhaps expect to see the EU being a bit stronger with third countries like Georgia, like the UAE, like Turkey, like Kazakhstan, to encourage them to hopefully come alongside the EU and the EU sanctions regime. Because the EU now has tools in its 11th sanctions package from earlier this year. It has tools to take steps against companies and indeed countries that don't follow or that facilitate sanctions evasion. So I think 2024 we can expect to see a more muscular EU with the possibility of enforcement action being taken against companies and countries that facilitate circumvention and evasion.
Thank you so much for a very, very interesting interview. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
What was new this week in business? Natia Taktakishvili will tell us more.
Medya Kobakhidze, general manager of Wyndham Grand Tbilisi, notes that the hotel had a special growth in the direction of tourism in 2023. According to her, along with international companies, Georgian ones started holding corporate events as well. In 2023, we had a special increase in the direction of business tourism. Among them, Georgian companies also started holding corporate events. In the case of our hotel, the share is quite high. About 30% of our revenues accounts for parties, events and business tourists, she says. The five-star American hotel brand Wyndham Grand Tbilisi was opened in 2019 with an investment of $48 million USD. It combines 158 rooms, conference halls, spa and wellness center, gym and restaurants with outstanding cuisine. The cost of accommodation in the hotel starts from 120 USD and varies within 2,500 USD. Georgi Asatiani, the manager partner of Octopus Fitness Club, talks with BMG TV about the history of the brand's development and establishment in the fitness industry of Georgia. We are proud that we were able to promote the fitness industry 8 years ago. When we started, this sector did not exist. This industry was not popular among young people, so they did not want to work in this direction. Today, gyms and pools are not places where people go only for exercise, but also for communication and interaction, says Georgi Asatiani. Today, Octopus operates with 3 branches. All memberships at Octopus are unlimited, so guests can visit the gym anytime. The prices start from 205 lari per month and increases depending on the number of services. The Whistle Group's portfolio includes both gas stations as well as Wendy's and Dunkin's restaurant chains. Recently, Whistle Group is signed an exclusive franchise agreement with Subway, one of the global leaders in the restaurant industry. So it turns out that another global brand has appeared in the group's restaurant business portfolio. About the exclusive agreement signed with Subway, the President of Whistle Group, Sosop Khakadze, spoke in TV program Business Evening and noted that the appearance of another global brand in the company's portfolio means creation of additional jobs and investments for Georgia. We currently employ up to 1,000 people in 3 years, 3,000 people will be employed. Project Biograph grew very quickly and entered the market very seriously. In this project, hundreds of people are employed. We are also adding smart supermarkets and all other businesses, which will finally allow us to employ 7,000 people in about 6 months, Sosop Khakadze noted. The brand of wrist and forehead cuff towels La Goutte will be exported to France. The founder of the brand, Mariam Chankotadze, stated this in TV program Women's Narrative. I lived in France for some time. That's why I decided that France would be the first exporting country where our brand would appear. We sent some of the products, but it turns out France prohibits reusable products by law, so we had to remove these products. We are currently working to return to the French market with branded robes and towels in the near future, said Mariam Chankotadze. La Goutte has been producing branded bathroom sets for hotels, salons and beauty centers for several months. The price of the product produced by La Goutte ranges from 45 lari to 50 lari. La Goutte appeared on the Georgian market 2 years ago. The company currently employs 2 people. Brand Nicolo Brega, which manufactures handmade wooden glasses, started production of watches. Nicolas Bregadze, the founder of the brand, announced this in TV program Women's Narrative. Glasses are our main product, but there was a request from the customer to add the new line. The main focus was on the watches, so we started their manufacturing. We worked on the concept for 2 years. The product has gone through multiple testing. These watches have a simple design with Japanese mechanisms, says Nicolas Bregadze. Nicolo Brega watch model is presented on the market in 3 different designs, including wooden, metal and silver frames. The price of wooden and metal models is 400 lari, while the silver model costs 1,000 lari. Speaking about the plans, Nicolas Bregadze said that he is going to export watches to America, while the brand will be represented in Europe via online platforms. Nicolo Brega has been operating in the Georgian market for more than 3 years and offers customers handmade glasses, bags and watches. The Nicolo Brega collection was created by a team of 10 people. The local dried fruit brand Skiji appeared on the market in 2015 and offers customers dried fruits of mandarin, orange, lemon, kiwi and other fruits. In an interview with BMWG, the co-founder of Skiji, Mako Tsirekidze, talked about the brand's challenges and future plans. According to her, the brand is working on introducing the HACCP standard to enter the international market. The introduction of the HACCP standard will allow our products to enter the international market. We are starting to work to bring our product to international exhibitions. The export market will give us a sense of stability. Also, we work on corporate gift orders, which is a very creative, responsible and pleasant process for us. Our goal is to have a different, distinctive and memorable offering every year, she added. According to Mako Tsirekidze, this year the brand had to grow the product price by about 50% due to the expensive raw materials and increased utility bills. Skiji was established in 2015 with an investment of 5,000 lari. The enterprise is located in the village of Khidistavi, Chokhatauri municipality, Guria. The company's raw materials are made with 100% local fruits. At this stage, in addition to family members, 7 people are employed in the company. The founder of company Papyrus Valley declares that wines are one of the most expensive in China, while Georgia has entered the cheap segment and the companies are making the second Russia in China. China is a very good market for premium wines, but unfortunately Georgian wines has entered the low price segment. China's beverage market is for premium and luxury products. It can be said China has saved French cognac and champagne. This is a boom in premium drinks, while the most expensive wines are sold in China. We have entered the cheaper segment. We are making the second Russia in China. More attention is needed for small exclusive wines. We have the opportunity to show unique wines to the world. I don't know why we get into such situation, Kurtadze said. Shalva Kurtadze, founder of Papyrus Valley, notes that the wine produced by them is sold in the premium segment in Hong Kong. The price is 300% higher compared to the Russian prices. Tbilisi City Hall is planning to rehabilitate Rustaveli Avenue from the next year, for which a total of 90 million lari will be spent. According to the City Hall, both buildings and road infrastructure will be renovated. Several new hotel projects have been announced on Rustaveli Avenue at the same time, but the old ones has not been completed so far. One of them is Hyatt Hotel, which has been under construction for 8 years. A 180-room hotel, Hyatt Regency Tbilisi, with an investment of $60 million USD, will have a Georgian restaurant in the basement, as well as a second restaurant on the 4th floor and a sky bar on the 7th floor. There will also be a 18-meter pool on the 7th floor. The hotel will create about 200 jobs after opening. At the end of the company, Rustaveli Property told BMWG that at this time 80% of the work on the interior facade of the hotel has been completed. The former building of the Ministry of Justice was purchased by Rustaveli Property from the state in 2012 for 13 million lari. The company planned to finish the project in 2017.
The World Bank published its monthly economic update for Georgia. The document provides the key highlights from the November edition, which covers the recent economic developments in the country. According to the report, the economy expanded by 4.1% year-on-year in September. Economic activity is slightly with 5.1% year-on-year growth in September compared to 5.8% growth year-on-year in August. For the year-to-date, growth remains robust at 6.8%. Growth has been driven by financial services, construction and trade, whereas manufacturing and real estate have been negative contributors. On the demand side, total turnover of value-added taxpayers increased by 3% year-on-year in nominal terms, and the number of new business openings declined by 14.3% year-on-year due to fewer non-resident registrations, World Bank says. Inflation rose by 0.6% month-on-month in October. Higher monthly inflation is largely attributed to rising fuel and clothing prices, putting upward pressure on overall price levels. In October, residential rental prices increased by 0.8% month-on-month, with year-on-year prices rising by 10%. Annual inflation stood below target at 0.8% year-on-year in October, driven largely by alcohol, housing, and transport prices. The producer price index PPI continued to reflect deflationary trends, recording a 3.3% year-on-year fall in September. The lari depreciated by 1% month-on-month in October, partly due to decelerating money transfer inflows. Overall, the lari has appreciated by 14% against the USD since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. The trade deficit narrowed slightly in October. Merchandise exports increased by 10% year-over-year after a slowdown in September, outpacing a 3% year-over-year growth in imports. Consequently, the trade deficit narrowed by 0.9% year-over-year in October. Available disaggregated data for September show that export growth continued to be driven by re-export of used cars, mostly to the Kyrgyz Republic and Kazakhstan. Meanwhile, other traditional export items such as copper, ferroalloys, and fertilizers fell sharply by over 50% year-over-year due to declining demand and prices. Overall, domestically produced exports fell by 25% year-over-year in September. Import growth was primarily fueled by increased demand for used cars, pharmaceuticals, and heavy machinery, whereas imports of fuel and copper concentrates fell. According to the World Bank, remittances contracted by 44% compared to October 2022, while remaining high by historical standards. Contraction was largely due to a substantial fall, 79% year-over-year in remittances from Russia, due in part to ruble depreciation and out-migration of Russian citizens. However, this decline was partly offset by higher remittances from other countries, notably Italy, the United States, Germany, and Greece. The proceeds from tourism remained solid in the third quarter of 2023, with a 7.3% year-over-year increase, albeit a slowdown from the remarkable 49% year-over-year increase observed in the second quarter of 2023, the World Bank says. The banking system remained healthy and profitable in September. Most lenders remained highly profitable, 25.3% return on equity and 3.9% return on assets. Non-performing loans remained stable at 3%. The credit portfolio growth picked up from 16.5% in September to 17.1% year-over-year in October, with foreign currency denominated loans increasing by 20%. Growth of deposits eased to 19%, adjusted for foreign exchange effects, driven by lower growth of foreign exchange deposits, 6% year-over-year. As a result, deposit dollarization dropped by 6 percentage points over the last year to 51% as of end of October 2023. The fiscal gap widened in September by 0.3 percentage points of GDP, the World Bank says. This led to a deficit of 1.2% of GDP in the first 9 months of 2023. General government tax collection increased by 9.4% year-over-year in nominal terms in September, driven by solid economic performance, as the World Bank says. Meanwhile, current spending expanded by 14% year-over-year. The largest increase was in social spending, with 32% year-over-year in nominal terms. Similarly, subsidies, goods and services, and interest payments increased by over 20% year-over-year in September. Meanwhile, capital spending declined by 1%. Public debt was estimated at 39.5% of 2023 projected GDP, slightly down from its level at year-end 2022, 39.9% of GDP, but up 8% in nominal terms. More on Georgia's weekly economic news and outlook in the checkpoints.
Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili met with Azerbaijan President Ilham Aliyev on Friday at the Economic Forum of United Nations Special Program for Economics of Central Asia running in Baku, Azerbaijan. Their meeting discussed the strategic cooperation in trade, economy, energy, transport and logistics, as well as prospects for development of the Middle Corridor, a transportation road network connecting China with Europe through the South Caucasus region, through modernization of railway and expansion expansion of ports and routes. The meeting noted Azerbaijan was one of the leading trading partner of Georgia. The construction of the East-West Highway in Georgia and Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway project were also among the discussed topics. The officials said the railway would become a part of the Europe-South Caucasus-Asia railway corridor in the future. The meeting also discussed the Black Sea submarine electricity cable project intended to connect the grids of South Caucasus and European Union member states. The Georgian Wheat and Flour Producers Association issued a statement affirming the stable functioning of wheat and flour market in Georgia. The association clarifies that country faces no problem with wheat supply. We would like to address recent information suggesting that interruption of wheat imports from Russia could challenge the country's food security. It's crucial to emphasize that country's mills currently have a supply of wheat for consumption that extends over 2 months. This supply is replenished consistently. As a result, Georgia's food security remains fully protected. Furthermore, Georgian farmers have stored enough food wheat to cover 1 month's consumption. The wheat price in both world and regional markets are stable, and the import of wheat and flour is proceeding without disruption, the association states. The association clarifies that there are alternative markets available in case of interruption, allowing for immediate shifts with ample time to do so. In Q3 2023, unemployment rate in Georgia did not change compared to the previous year and equaled 15.6%, the National Statistics Office of Georgia reported. According to GEOSTAT, the number of hired employees increased by 28.3 thousand persons and reached 943,000, while the number of self-employed decreased by 21.5 thousand and equaled to 422,000. In the same period, the number of unemployed increased by 1.4 thousand and equaled 252,000. In Q3 2023 compared to the corresponding period of the previous year, the unemployment rate increased in urban settlements by 0.4 percentage point, while in rural settlements it decreased by 0.6 percentage points. Traditionally, the unemployment rate is higher for men than for women. In Q3 2023 compared to the corresponding period of the previous year, this indicator decreased for women by 0.2 percentage point, while it increased by 0.1 percentage points for men and equaled 12.8 and 17.7% respectively. The labor force participation rate is higher for men than for women. In the Q3 2023, the indicator for women was 43.1% and for men 66%. The labor force participation rate for women decreased by 0.4 percentage point, while for men it increased by 0.7 percentage points compared to the corresponding period of the previous year. A government meeting was held under the chairmanship of the Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili. The member of the cabinet discussed 9 agenda items. According to the government administration, the head of government instructed the Minister of Justice to design an amnesty project to apply to individual residents built without construction documentation on land plots owned by individuals. During the discussion on this amendment, it was pointed out that as a result of this decision, the practice of illegal home building will be eliminated on the one hand, and citizens owning individual home in village or cities without construction documentation issued for them will no longer be required to go through the complicated and costly procedure of legalization. The amnesty will apply to about 1 million citizens. In January-October 2023, the external merchandise trade of Georgia amounted to $70 million, 16.2% higher compared to the same period of 2022, GEOSTAT reported. The exports equaled $5 million, while imports stood at $12 million. The negative trade balance was $7 million in January-October 2023, and its share in external trade turnover constituted 42.6%. In January-October 2023, the share of top trading partners by exports in total exports of Georgia amounted to 80.5%. The top partners via Azerbaijan, Armenia and Kazakhstan. In January-October 2023, the share of top trading partners by imports in total imports of Georgia amounted to 70.8%. The top trading partners via Turkey, USA and Russia. In January-October 2023, motor cars claimed the first place in the list of top export items, equaling $1 million with 34.5% of total exports. The exports of copper ores and concentrates totaled to $450 million and their share in the total exports amounted to 80.8%. The exports of wine of fresh grapes occupied the third place, standing at $270 million and constituting 4.3% of total exports. Georgian Economy Minister Levan Davitashvili on Tuesday highlighted progress made by Georgia on its path of European integration at the ministerial meeting on green energy development in Budapest. Davitashvili told the event the European Commission's recommendations for the European Council to grant the country EU membership candidate status was historic. The ministry said the official was involved in the event aimed at implementing the agreement on a strategic partnership in green energy development and transmission between the governments of Azerbaijan, Georgia, Romania and Hungary. In his opening remarks, Davitashvili noted Georgia's integration into the EU would be accelerated even more by participation in events like ministerial and cooperating with partners. He said economic and energy integration with EU was important for his country and noted the government was actively working to utilize the domestic hydro resources. Our goal is to export electricity to EU market. We are also working on development of renewable energy projects. In addition, our goal is to support the construction of small and medium-sized stations as much as possible. We also launched the so-called price mechanisms which will help the energy sector to become even more stable, Davitashvili said. Acting President of National Bank of Georgia, Natia Turnava, met with the new U.S. Ambassador to Georgia, Robin Danigan, discussing the importance of the existing strategic partnership between the two nations and prospects for deepening the cooperation. According to the MBG press office, the U.S. remains the most important strategic partner of Georgia. Natia Turnava briefed the newest ambassador on the present state of affairs and ongoing projects in Georgia's banking industry. We talked about close relations and cooperation between the National Bank and the U.S. Embassy, the U.S. Agency for International Development. The National Bank has active cooperation with USAID in various directions, and I would like to express my gratitude to the US government, the US Embassy and American people for their support for the ongoing reforms in Georgia over the years. During the meeting with the US Ambassador, we agreed that we will actively continue coordination and cooperation in the future, Turnava noted. In Q3 2023, the number of Georgian resident travel trips abroad equaled 890,000, which was 18.2% higher compared to the data from the same period of previous year, according to the National Statistics Office of Georgia. According to the document, most of the trips, 45.4%, were made by travelers of 31-50 age group. The number of outbound visits by Georgian visitors from above-mentioned number made up 647,000, which is 21.7% higher compared to the data from the same period of 2022. As of Eurostat, the majority of outbound visits, 48%, were made by the visitors of 31-50 age group. The number of visits made by women equal to 48.2% of total number of visits. In Q3 2023, the purpose of majority of outbound visits was shopping. The majority of outbound visits were made in Turkey and Armenia, 279,000 and 107,000 respectively. In Q3 2023, the average number of nights spent during the visits equaled to 7.2 nights, which is 13.4% higher than the figure indicator in Q3 2022. The expenditures during the visit made in Q3 2023 equal to 592.4 million lari, which is 7.1% higher compared to the data from the same period of the previous year. Average expenditure on the visit decreased by 12% compared to Q3 2022 and amounted to 950 lari.
That's all for today. Before we meet next Sunday, as usual, 11 a.m. sharp, you can follow us on bm.g for more updates and exclusives on business and economics in Georgia and beyond.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.